Cheers, fellow Startup Week community. Welcome to another session of Founder War Stories. I'm joined today by Megan Lacy from Lumineye, and she's here today with us to share her war stories while building and running Lumineye. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Happy
nice
to be here.
How do you like our setup?
It's awesome. It's the best virtual setup I could hope for.
Okay, I love that. I like that. So why don't we start by giving the audience just a quick intro on you.
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about Lumineye, and then if you could end by telling us about the product, what it does and how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll take you and the audience through a set of questions, just really highlighting how you went from how you came up with the idea, and then took the idea into a product, and then built a business around it.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Megan Lacy. I'm one of the co-founders of Lumineye. I started Lumineye in 2017 with my two co-founders, Corbin Hennon and Rob Kleffner. And we got together because I basically had skills that matched up. So Corey has a background in physics, Rob has a background in software engineering, and I have a background in mechanical engineering and design. And so I went through the Stanford D School, which kind of a lot of startups start there, but I never thought I'd be a startup founder. And then I moved to Boise, met Corey and Rob, and we decided to start a company together.
Okay, that just happened then. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. Left the Bay Area to start a startup. Very ironic.
So did Stanford D infect you with the bug? I mean, it's a pretty world-renowned school and thought leader.
I think a little bit. I think it definitely got me thinking about it. I don't think I considered it as a career, but I was exposed to it so much there that I never really consciously said, I'm going to be an entrepreneur when I was in college. But it was always something now looking back on it, was probably just in the back of my mind, and I hadn't really put the pieces together. And I more just so realized that I liked prototyping, I liked creating new things, and then as I started building the company with Corey and Rob, I realized that meant I probably wanted to be a startup founder because I liked doing completely new things that no one had done before.
Okay, so 3 co-founders. Tell us about the product. What does it do?
Yeah, so at Lumineye, we built a through-wall sensor that detects people through walls. So basically, it's X-ray vision for first responders, not really X-rays. But you're using radar to identify where people are on the other side of walls for hostage rescue situations, finding people in fires, search and rescue missions, finding people in rubble and brush and in avalanches and stuff like that.
Very cool. Okay, so that's what the product does, and those are presumably some of your customers then?
Yeah, so mostly we focus on the first responder market.
Okay, cool. So now that we know what the thing does, let's talk about the prelude to the thing, even to the idea. So kind of take me through the months that led up to when you uncovered the idea of this product.
Yeah, so we actually got started in the Boise State Venture College. So I was there because I went through a program there, they were doing a Harvard Business School program. And so I was doing HBS online through the Venture College, and then that's where I met Corey. And then Corey recruited me to take this class with him called Hacking for Defense. And he described it, and I was like, I've been in these types of classes before. You get really involved with the customer because basically you're solving their problems. They have a problem statement, and you have to solve it. And I was like, wow, that's going to be a lot of work. I don't know if I can handle it. And he called me over and over winter break trying to get me to take this class in the spring semester with him. And so I decided, I'm just going to do it. And so I took it with him, and then that's actually the class that we started the company out of. And so we like to joke that, I really did know what I was getting myself into at that moment, because that's why I was so hesitant.
Good on Corey to talk you into it, though, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So Hack for Defense sounds like it was the format was sort of a reverse pitch where problems were thrown out. And did you pick it, or how did that work?
So U.S. Special Operations Command, basically all of the different departments of defense had problems, and so they pitched them at the educators course. And so U.S. Special Operations Command had this problem. And the reason that our cohort picked this was because Corey was at the educators course, and he actually lost a family friend in a blind breach, which is basically where detectives are going to the door to serve a warrant. And unfortunately, there was actually someone on the other side of the door that killed him instantly. And so when he heard about the problem, he wanted to work on that. So that's why we picked that problem statement. And then I have two brothers in the Army. And so once we started talking about this, they're both Army infantry. And so my brothers would be at risk for that too. And so it definitely struck home with both of us.
Okay, so even though, because with most reverse pitches, you just automatically assume, people pick something or they're assigned something that they may or may not be passionate about, but there seems to be some pretty personal hooks there, right?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, you could have got stuck with something that like you weren't passionate about, but I think since we were in a unique spot because typically the educators, basically the professors would come and they would pick the problem statements for their student teams. But since we were just kind of getting it off the ground at Boise State, Corey went. And so he was actually the student, but also picked the problem statement. So I think we lucked out in that sense that we got to work on something really awesome.
Okay, so you got a problem statement. What was the first thing you did? Did you kind of look around for how this problem is solved?
Exactly.
And with other, tell me about that.
Yeah, so basically the point of Hacking for Defense is to find existing solutions for the Department of Defense. Like they don't want you to have to go start a company. Like it's a 3-month program. Like they're not expecting that. But we went out there and there are other through-wall sensors and we just heard over and over from users, like they're too bulky, they're not accurate enough, they're too expensive, they're like not meeting my needs in X, Y, and Z.
So who'd you talk to? These users are the first responders then?
Yeah, so we talked to law enforcement officers, we talked to firefighters, search and rescue, building and perimeter security, and then a lot of people within the DoD. So
how'd you get a hold of them? Was it you cold calling them or was this through the program that you had access to?
Yeah, so we had a problem. So our problem sponsor, Special Operations Command, he helped us make the initial introductions, at least within the military.
Okay.
And then we spread ourselves from there through networking. And then mostly with the first responders, we just like reached out to people we knew. Like, oh, I know so-and-so is a law enforcement officer. Like I should call them and see, like maybe they're not the right person to talk to, but maybe they know, 5 people I could call and see if they're the right person to talk to. And so we really just like built that networking. Which I think has actually really helped us in the long run, is that we have some of these relationships that we've been fostering for almost 4 years now.
Well, especially as I'm listening to you, DoD sales cycles are super long, super hard to break into. You talk about a startup, risk flags go up, unproven technology. DoD is typically kind of conservative in that sense, but it sounds like the way they structured it is you had warm introductions to end users, and they sort of set you up with that network. It sounds like.
Yeah, they definitely started it, and then I think we've been good at fostering it. And I think too, like some of the DoD users that didn't want to work with the student group are more willing to work with the startup that's still going on, a few years later, that actually is a product out there. And so I think even if we didn't, strike home runs with every single phone call back then, we've been able to go back to some of those people and be like, hey, like, remember us? Like, like we're Lumineye now. Like we'd love to still talk to you about this problem you have.
Okay, so you have the problem statement, you're talking to users about their workarounds or their pain points. At what point in those conversations did your team say, scrap commercially off the shelf, we got to build this our own?
Yeah, so I would say probably like halfway through the Hacking for Defense course. I think that it was always kind of a little bit on the minds that, like, it was probably on Corey's mind more than my own, like, initially. But I think we just realized, like, oh, we could actually really make something here about halfway through. And then we actually got an interview to Y-Combinator when, like, we just had an idea. And so I guess for those...
How do you get an interview at Y-Combinator?
Yeah, so you have to, like, submit an application online. And I think at this point there's, like, 12,000 companies or so that apply. And then, like, I think 500 to 600 get selected for interviews, and then they select about 200 per batch. And so the fact that we got, I knew about Y-Combinator because, I was in the Bay Area before, and that's where they're based. And then Corey, has always kind of followed them. And so we were like, wow, like, someone in the commercial world thinks that this is a really useful problem. We might as well work on it for a little bit of time.
So YC was sort of external validation in a way for you guys?
Yeah, it was. Okay. And so then we like that did definitely, I think, like motivate us. It was our first, I would say, like we had a lot of users that were supporting us, but it's good to get validation from the market and, from investors and all of that. And although that wasn't like, like they didn't write a check or something, it was just like, oh, well, like someone thinks this is interesting. Like we should probably continue to pursue this, at least to see what we can do. for a short amount of time at least.
Okay, so you get the external validation.
Yeah.
Tell me how you came up with this solution, the product that you described earlier. How did you get to that?
So I think we prototyped for about a year and a half.
And when you say prototype, I want to be clear. So you're actually building physical product,
Yeah, so we
right?
basically, so I guess Corey and I worked odd jobs, and Rob, like to make ends meet. So basically we're like, I worked the front desk at the venture college. Corey did some IT work for his parents' company. And basically, and then we would like submit to the Idaho Entrepreneur Challenge, Boise Startup Week. And like these pitches were like life or death for us. We're like,
You guys are hustling, right?
We have to win. We're like, we don't have any money. We're building hardware. Like we need to buy our prototype. And so we were always like very do or die with the pitch competitions early on. And I guess we'll go into it later, but that has served us well in the future or like later on. But we would basically like work really hard, use our own money, and then we'd win a pitch competition, and then we would use that money, build a prototype, test it, figure out what was wrong with it, test it with users. We have some local users that are like, ex-Marines or ex-Army and stuff like that. So we'd test it with them, get their feedback, and then we'd change it, and then we'd wait until we got more money, and then, we'd make a bigger change.
So there's these instances of cash, and
Yeah.
I say cash, that probably wasn't a whole lot.
Yeah.
I actually know how much it was because we wrote the check to you. But they're really lifelines, right? I mean, you're going from
yeah.
prototype to prototype.
Yeah, well, especially for a hardware company, because for us, like, and I mean, everything costs money, like to time, but it's like we were putting so much time into it, but there's only so much time you can put in if you can't afford the equipment that you need or the one component that's going to like make this new solution, and you don't know until you've bought it if you're right.
Right.
And so
So how'd you build the first one? Did you like patch it together, MacGyver style?
Yeah,
or?
we like to call it our Home Depot special.
Okay.
Because like we literally just put like our electronics in a box, and then I just like took like a bandsaw and just like made it a box with like kitchen cabinet handles, and we like brought this places to like show users. It was.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, we have it like put away so that we're not gonna like accidentally break it or something. But it had like a door hinge on it. It was quite something. But so we called it our Home Depot special.
But it did what it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
Did it validate that it was usable?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah, so our first like functional through-wall sensor was set up like that, and then we made like 2 more like that, and then we came upon what we now have as our product, and we accidentally along the road, like I talked about how some of the devices were a little bit bulkier. We kept realizing, bulkier, it gets better, and so then we tested our prototype, and we were so proud of it with one of our users, and he was like, "This is too big." And then we realized, we were like, wait, we're playing the game that everyone else was playing, and so we totally redid our design. I want to say around the new year in like 2018, 2019 range. Yeah.
Okay, so the features or the features that came with and the additional ability with more real estate, more space, did that sort of get you down the rabbit hole then? Because it sounded like initially that was the very thing you were looking to solve for.
Yeah. So we just realized that we were making the wrong trade-offs. And so once we realized that, then we started changing our approach, going to a smaller device that wasn't as functional, but met all of those needs. And we're like, we'll start here, and then we can build out this functionality with like a product roadmap. But this is where we have to start.
It's fair to call that your MVP?
Yeah, exactly.
Did you parade that around with end users and potential customers? Did you get in the hands of folks?
Yeah. So we actually we did that locally, and then we had been meanwhile been applying to this program called X-Tech Search through the Army. And so we applied for X-Tech Search 1.0, which it's basically like a pitch white paper competition that spans over 9 months. And they went from about 600 applicants to 60 companies in phase 2 to 25 companies in phase 3 to 12 in the final phase. And then they pick one company at the end that wins the grand prize. And so basically it's all grant money. And the first time we went, we had a cardboard prototype. We're like, trust me, it works in our lab. Like, our pitch was not, like super scientific, and we did not make it past the second round. And then the second time we went back, we had this prototype that our MVP, and we actually ended up winning the whole thing.
So you went to the first year.
Yeah.
didn't make it to the finals, and then you learned your lessons and came back with an MVP and took it.
Yeah,
That
so
was
then
150,000. Is that right?
it was 4,000, then 10,000, then 120, and then 250.
Wow.
So the grand prize we just won about a year ago.
So I mean, is that like the typical playbook for a hardware DoD startup? You know,
No.
I mean, investors are going to shy away from putting money in for all the obvious reasons.
Yeah.
But is that those lifelines? Is that a playbook? Would you say?
Well,
or?
I would say it's a new playbook that the DoD is using. I would say it's even just in the last few years that I've been involved in it. It's just changed so much. Like the DoD is really pushing towards like how can we get startups and small businesses like funding sooner and like just small amounts so that they can prove out a concept to us, and then once they've proved it out a bit, then we can like move forward and maybe do like a more traditional contract. So the X-Tech Search program has only been running for, I think they're on their like 4th iteration. So we applied to the first and then we won the second. So that's super new. And I'm excited about those opportunities. And it's not necessarily always like, a through-wall sensor, but it could be like a technology that, like it's typically in the home, but it's actually really useful for the DoD in this specific scenario. So I'm just trying to get, I guess, more crossover there, because why like recreate the wheel if it kind of already exists?
I see. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, who was your first customer? Did they go off the MVP, or who was the first paying customer? And tell me a little bit about that.
The Army and the Air Force like were the first users that we worked with through contracts, and so it was DoD based, and I think a lot of that stemmed from the traction with the Army through the X-Tech Search program. I think that really helped just kind of solidify us as like, okay, this is not a hacking for defense class anymore. Like this is like a real company, and they're making real product that could actually really help the people in the Department of Defense.
So in terms of my experience with DoD, and I have my background is in manufacturing, and we had contracts, fixed firm pricing contracts with DoD, is that, like I said earlier, they shy away from risk, right, and unproven technologies. And I will say this, they also, my experience was and this was in my mid-20s, when I would walk into the room with a General Dynamics, they would sort of raise their eyebrows at, who is this kid? They were older engineers who had done this, and for good reason. There are a lot of legacy systems employed there. So how was that being coming out of YC, very techy, startup-y, and then this heavy-driven compliance world? Like, how did that affect the three of you?
I think we're still learning, but I think we get a little bit of, like we've been doing it for a long enough time, and I think that we like to tell our story a lot to the end users, because none of us have served, and I think that does make a difference. But like we say, listen, like we literally spent our own money on this for 2 years. Like we're really passionate about this, and like we don't claim to be the experts on it. Like we want to build the technology that they want, and so I think we take a very humble approach to it. But I do think, like definitely, like we get, even when we won the X-Tech Search, they're like, wow, young faces up here. Like we were also probably the youngest group in the top 12 companies, and also, like, I know, like, my hair is purple, and, like, like, there's a lot of things that
Were there
scream,
a lot
like,
of other women? Or
no.
were you, okay.
No, yeah. So
I didn't think so.
not many women, and then, so it's, like, it's pretty evident, like, that we're non-traditional in that sense, but I think that we just try and be very humble and, recognize that, like, we're not the end user, and that we want to work with them. And I think, when they understand that, like, oh, well, they really genuinely care about my needs. If they can build it, like, why not? Like.
So were there any major aha moments, pivot moments since the MVP was launched as you were collecting user feedback? Was there anything that I would look at your product before and after and I would say, whoa, that's different?
I would say maybe just our user interface. We just got really, I think in the beginning we were really focused on, like, because we had tried so hard to focus on functionality. And, like, we need to get the through-wall sensing working. We need to get it working as best as possible. And then we started adding all this new functionality. And then we started looking at users and we were like, oh, wait a second, like, it's getting really confusing. And so I think that's something that we've really tried to improve upon in, like, the last, like, 6 months or so, is, like, I've spent a little bit more time, because I mostly do mechanical engineering, but I have a little bit of background in UI and UX, so I do that for us too. And I've really tried to like, really just sit there with the users and just watch what they're doing and like, okay, like we shouldn't do that anymore. And like, okay, so I think we're getting better at doing that. But in order to be able to do that, you have to have a working product. So we had to figure out the first stuff first, but in order to get it used a lot more, you have to make sure that it's easy to use.
Yeah. Let's talk about your team for a second. So I think it's fascinating that, for one, there's 3 co-founders. I take part in debates that argue whether you should be even seeking a co-founder or not, and then you have 3 of them, which is cool. The 3 of you are also friends, and so there's some background there.
Yeah.
How is that dynamic with 3 co-founders, being friends? You've done this out of college, really.
Yeah.
And that's I don't want to say that's the only thing you guys have done, but it seems to be the thing you latched on to right out of school. So what are the dynamics like between the 3 of you?
Yeah, so I guess to give you a little bit more context with that is that the 3 of us lived together, for like a whole year. And Corey and Rob were actually randomly assigned college roommates at the University of Idaho their freshman years. So I think they've almost known each other for a decade now, which is crazy. But yeah, I think for us doing hardware that has also software emphasis, the 3 co-founder structure makes a lot of sense because when you have a specialization like, oh, I'm doing software or I'm doing hardware, but you're not doing like a combo, you don't need as many overlapping skill sets like to create that MVP. But I don't think that without all of our skill sets, we would have been able to create that MVP because we needed the software, we needed the electrical and the radar understanding, and we needed the mechanical design to actually make that happen. And so I'm sure that, maybe some of us could have figured it out, but it would have been a lot harder without that full package. So I think it's worked really well for us.
And so these days you guys are in production, I assume?
Yeah, so we are just starting commercial sales and then working on those DoD contracts.
And you produce everything in Boise, as I
Yeah, we do
That's
everything ourselves right now. So
as you look back now, so you're on the cusp of commercializing your product, right? Years in the making, years of relationships with friends and co-founders. Is there anything you would have done differently looking back? And maybe not necessarily, something that didn't turn out so good, but something that you learned along the way that you would want to share with other young founders?
Yeah, that's tough.
And it can be more than one thing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think something that I'm glad we emphasized, not to change the question a little bit, but I'm glad that we emphasized the pitching and telling our story really early because maybe I think in the beginning it was really hard. It's like, how do you explain through wall sensing to someone? And how do you get them to buy in? And I think that we got a really, because we literally needed the pitch competitions to fund us, we got really good at telling our story early so that when we actually were in Y-Combinator last summer and we were, pitching in front of 3,000 investors for demo day, it was nerve-wracking, but it wasn't that big of a deal. And so I guess that's a good thing and a bad thing is you don't want to get too focused on that because I think sometimes we would sway in that direction where we're not building the product because we're so focused on our pitch. But I think that is a really important thing is you have to be able to tell your story. And you can always do it better, but I think it's really important to be able to do that.
Storytelling, even for Department of Defense applications, storytelling.
Yeah,
all right.
Still important.
That's a major key takeaway, I like
it.
Well, that brings us to the end of the session for today. Thank you for joining. Thank you for sharing a brewski.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure having you here. And with that, startup community, cheers again. Thanks for joining. That was another session of Founders War Stories at Boise Startup Week.